In a world of pain and trauma, one woman found the strength to rise above it all. Join us on Midnight Murmurs as we follow Alice's journey of resilience and love, from the scars of her past to the triumphs of her present. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Chapter 1: The Awakening. Alice jogged through the bustling streets of the city, her red hair bouncing behind her. She darted around pedestrians and leaped over obstacles, exhilarated by the rush of wind against her skin. She was in her element, free and unencumbered. When she arrived at the park, she slowed down and took in her surroundings. Children were playing on the swings, dogs were chasing after frisbees, and couples were strolling hand in hand. Alice watched them all, feeling detached. She was here, but not really a part of this world. As she stretched under the shade of a tree, a tall man approached her. He had broad shoulders and a friendly smile. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Alice tensed up, her hand instinctively reaching for her pepper spray. But as she looked into his kind eyes, something about him put her at ease. "Sure," she said, gesturing to the grass beside her. They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the wind. Alice wondered why he was here. Was he trying to hit on her? Was he trying to mug her? She couldn't shake off her paranoia. But then he spoke. "Nice day, isn't it?" Alice was surprised by his simple words, but she found herself nodding in agreement. They talked for a while, about the weather, the park, and their favorite movies. Alice began to relax, and she realized that she was enjoying the conversation. Then he asked her about herself. About her dreams, her fears, her hopes. Alice was taken aback by his curiosity, but she found herself opening up to him. She told him about her recent breakup, about the loneliness she had been experiencing, about the fear of never finding someone who truly understood her. As she talked, something strange happened. A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of connection she hadn't experienced in a long time. This man, this stranger, was listening to her. Really listening to her. Alice looked into his kind eyes, and for the first time in a long time, a flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe there were good people in the world. Maybe there was someone out there who would understand her. As the sun began to set, they exchanged numbers and said their goodbyes. Alice walked back to her apartment, her mind buzzing with thoughts. She didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, she sensed that there was something worth exploring. And as she lay down to sleep that night, with the memory of the stranger's kind smile still fresh in her mind, she knew that this was the beginning of something new. Something that would change her life forever. Chapter 2: The Attack. The sun was sinking, coloring the sky in colors of orange and red as the young woman with brilliant red hair jogged through the park. Her freckled face was stiff with resolve, her blue eyes concentrated on the route ahead of her. As she ran, she thought about everything that had transpired over the last several months. Her split with her longtime partner, her choice to quit her career and start again, and the new individuals she had encountered along the road. She felt alive for the first time in years, but she knew that there were still dark shadows hiding in the corners of her mind. Suddenly, she felt a hand grasp her from behind. She tried to scream, but a hard palm clamped down over her lips. She resisted, flailing and kicking as much as she could, but there were too many of them. They held her down, pulling at her garments and leering at her with malicious eyes. She fought back with all her strength, but it was no use. They were stronger, and there were too many of them. They pounded her, again and over again, until she was battered and bruised. When they were finished, they left her lying on the ground, shattered and bleeding. The young woman lay there for a long time, too startled and in agony to move. She felt a chilly wind blowing across her skin, and her face hurt where she had been slapped. She realized that she had been transformed forever, that nothing would ever be the same again. Slowly, painfully, she pulled herself to her feet. She staggered around the park, her vision clouded and her body hurting. When she eventually reached her flat, she dropped into the floor, weeping. Days stretched into weeks, and the young woman battled to come to grips with what had happened to her. She had always been strong and independent, but suddenly she felt weak and vulnerable. The scar on her throat was a continual reminder of the attack, a sign of the brutality that had been done to her. But she refused to let the attack define her. She refused to be a victim. She sought out counseling and support groups, ready to recover and go on. She began to work out again, to push her body to its limits in order to restore her strength and her confidence. Through it all, she never forgot the faces of the guys who had attacked her. She knew that she could never rest until she had located them and made them pay for what they had done. As the young woman practiced, she began to notice a man observing her from a distance. He was tall and slim, with piercing blue eyes and a rough, attractive face. She could tell that he was different from the other guys she had met, that he had a depth and a kindness that marked him apart. One day, when she was leaving the gym, the man approached her. His name was Aiden, and he was a martial arts instructor. He had been watching her work out, and he was amazed by her commitment and her strength. The young woman was cautious at first, but something about Aiden pulled her in. They began to converse, and she found herself opening up to him in a manner that she had never done before. He listened to her, and he understood her suffering. As they practiced together, the young woman felt herself transforming. She felt stronger, more confident, and more alive. And she realized that she had discovered something unique in Aiden. But their bliss was short-lived. One day, as they were leaving the gym, they were attacked by a bunch of males. The young woman recognized them quickly as the same men who had attacked her in the park. Aiden fought back ferociously, but there were too many of them. They overpowered him, and he slumped to the ground, unconscious. The young woman was filled with a burning wrath, and she assaulted the guys with all the vigor she could manage. She battled with a ferocity that she didn't realize she had, her fists and feet flying in a whirl of action. The guys were taken off guard by her aggressiveness, and they began to falter. One by one, she brought them down, until they were all laying on the ground, groaning in anguish. As the young woman stood there, panting and soaked in perspiration, she understood that she had avenged herself. She had fought her demons and emerged victorious. Aiden, who had regained consciousness, stared up at her with a mixture of amazement and horror. He had never seen someone fight like that before, with such a raw and strong passion. But the young woman recognized that her victory was bittersweet. She had won the battle, but the fight was far from finished. She understood that there would always be other guys like those who had assaulted her, and that she would have to be ready for them. As she walked away from the site of the battle, her face set in a determined attitude, she realized that she had been transformed forever. She was no longer the same woman she had been before the attack, and she knew that she would never be able to forget what had happened to her. But she was stronger now. She was a survivor. And she knew that no matter what life threw at her, she would always be able to stand up and fight back. Days stretched into weeks, and the young woman battled to come to grips with what had happened to her. She had always been strong and independent, but suddenly she felt weak and vulnerable. The scar on her throat was a continual reminder of the attack, a sign of the brutality that had been done to her. But she refused to let the attack define her. She refused to be a victim. She sought out counseling and support groups, ready to recover and go on. She began to work out again, to push her body to its limits in order to restore her strength and her confidence. Through it all, she never forgot the faces of the guys who had attacked her. She knew that she could never rest until she had located them and made them pay for what they had done. As the young woman practiced, she began to notice a man observing her from a distance. He was tall and slim, with piercing blue eyes and a rough, attractive face. She could tell that he was different from the other guys she had met, that he had a depth and a kindness that marked him apart. One day, when she was leaving the gym, the man approached her. His name was Aiden, and he was a martial arts instructor. He had been watching her work out, and he was amazed by her commitment and her strength. The young woman was cautious at first, but something about Aiden pulled her in. They began to converse, and she found herself opening up to him in a manner that she had never done before. He listened to her, and he understood her suffering. As they practiced together, the young woman felt herself transforming. She felt stronger, more confident, and more alive. And she realized that she had discovered something unique in Aiden. But their bliss was short-lived. One day, as they were leaving the gym, they were attacked by a bunch of males. The young woman recognized them quickly as the same men who had attacked her in the park. Aiden fought back ferociously, but there were too many of them. They overpowered him, and he slumped to the ground, unconscious. The young woman was filled with a burning wrath, and she assaulted the guys with all the vigor she could manage. She battled with a ferocity that she didn't realize she had, her fists and feet flying in a whirl of action. The guys were taken off guard by her aggressiveness, and they began to falter. One by one, she brought them down, until they were all laying on the ground, groaning in anguish. As the young woman stood there, panting and soaked in perspiration, she understood that she had avenged herself. She had fought her demons and emerged victorious. Aiden, who had regained consciousness, stared up at her with a mixture of amazement and horror. He had never seen someone fight like that before, with such a raw and strong passion. But the young woman recognized that her victory was bittersweet. She had won the battle, but the fight was far from finished. She understood that there would always be other guys like those who had assaulted her, and that she would have to be ready for them. As she walked away from the site of the battle, her face set in a determined attitude, she realized that she had been transformed forever. She was no longer the same woman she had been before the attack, and she knew that she would never be able to forget what had happened to her. But she was stronger now. She was a survivor. And she knew that no matter what life threw at her, she would always be able to stand up and fight back. Chapter 3: The Revenge. The rain came down in sheets as our protagonist, her red hair matted to her skull, made her way down the desolate lane. She was equipped with nothing except her drive and a passionate sense of justice, but she knew it was all she needed. As she walked, memories of the incident filled her head. The way the guys had laughed as they forced her to the ground, the feel of their hands on her body, the sound of her own screaming. She pushed the memories away and focused on the work at hand. The lane was dark and small, the perfect site for an ambush. But our protagonist was no easy target. She had trained for years in martial arts and self-defense, and she had a plan. She halted in front of a door marked with a rough depiction of a skull. She knocked 3 times, and after a moment, the door creaked open. A guy with a dirty mustache and a scowl on his face looked out. "What do you want?" he hissed. "I'm here to see your boss," our protagonist stated, her voice firm and assured. The man snorted. "Boss don't see nobody." She stepped forward, her defiance increasing. "He'll see me. Tell him it's the girl he attempted to kill." The man's eyes widened with recognition. He stepped aside and let her enter. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke and the stink of perspiration and booze. Men lounged on couches, smoking and drinking. Our protagonist examined the room, her eyes looking for any indication of the individuals who had attacked her. At the rear of the room, she observed a figure seated in a throne-like chair. It was the boss, a huge man with a scar running down his cheek. He looked up as she approached. Well, he muttered, a vicious smirk on his lips. "Look who it is." The tiny bitch who couldn't take a joke. Our protagonist felt a flash of wrath, yet she kept her voice cool. I'm not here to joke. I'm here for justice. The boss laughed. Justice? What are you gonna do, sweetie? Call the cops? They don't give a thing about garbage like us. I don't need the cops, our protagonist remarked. I can take care of myself. The boss leaned closer, his eyes glinting. Is that so? Well, let's see what you've got. He clicked his fingers, and two guys walked forward. They were large and strong, with tattoos covering their arms. Our protagonist felt a glimmer of panic, but she brushed it away. She knew she could take them. The fight was short and violent. Our protagonist moved with lightning speed, her fists flying as she brought down one man after another. The other guys in the room stared in astonishment as she battled like a wild beast, her wounds and bruises only making her more savage. In the end, she stood alone in the room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The boss glanced at her with a mix of dread and adoration. You're something else, girl, he remarked. I'll give you what you desire. The men who assaulted you are dead. I made sure of it. Our protagonist felt a flush of satisfaction. She had done it. She had gained her retribution. But as she turned to go, the boss said again, "But remember this, daughter. You may have won one battle, but the fight goes on. There will always be guys like us, and there will always be women like you. And the world will never be secure for any of us." Our protagonist felt a shudder go down her spine as the boss's remarks set in. She knew he was correct. The world was a frightening place, full of violence and persecution. But she also realized that she wasn't alone. She had her own strength and the support of those like her. As she went out into the rain once more, she felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. She had overcome her worries and came out triumphant. And she knew that no matter what the future contained, she would always fight for what was right. Over the ensuing days and weeks, our protagonist proceeded to investigate the world around her. She toured new locations and met new people, each encounter adding to her feeling of purpose and adventure. She also began to think on her life, and the circumstances that had led her to this point. She thought of the guys who had attacked her, and the wounds they had left behind. But instead of feeling humiliated or terrified, she felt a sense of pride. She wore her scars like badges of pride, symbols of her endurance and fortitude. As she sat alone in her apartment one night, her thoughts drifted to the future. She understood that there would be more trials ahead, more fights to fight. But she was ready for them. She was a fighter, a survivor, and nothing could break her spirit. And so, with a stubborn smile on her face, she peered out into the darkness, ready for whatever was ahead. For she knew that no matter what the future brought, she would face it with courage and resolve, always going forward and never looking back. Chapter 4: The Romance. The sun was sinking over the city as Alice sat on a seat in the park. She couldn't help but feel a feeling of melancholy, reflecting back on her prior relationships and the suffering she had undergone. But then she spotted him. Jack, the man who would change everything. He was walking his dog, a beautiful white poodle, and he drew her attention immediately. Alice noted his lovely grin and the way his eyes glittered in the light. She felt a sudden warmth inside her chest, a feeling she had never experienced before. Jack approached her, and they began up a chat about their common love of animals. Alice found herself laughing and smiling more than she had in months, and Jack seemed to truly enjoy her company. They swapped numbers, and Jack vowed to call her shortly. Days stretched into weeks, and Jack and Alice began to see each other regularly. They would meet up for coffee or for walks in the park with Jack's dog. Alice felt herself opening up to Jack in ways she never had before. She informed him about her prior trauma and her difficulties with anxiety and despair. Jack listened intently, providing words of encouragement and support. He never criticized her or made her feel ashamed of her wounds. In fact, he appeared to look through them, understanding the power and tenacity that lurked underneath. As their friendship progressed, Alice began to feel more and more comfortable with Jack. She found herself letting go of her anxieties and insecurities and allowing herself to be vulnerable. Jack was kind and sympathetic, never pushing her too far or too soon. One evening, Jack surprised Alice with a romantic meal at his apartment. He made her favorite supper and had candles set all around the room. Alice felt a flutter in her stomach as she glanced at him, clothed in a suit and tie. "Thank you for doing this," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's my pleasure," Jack said, grabbing her hand. "You deserve to be treated like a queen." Alice reddened, experiencing a surge of emotion. She had never been handled like this before. Jack was unlike from any male she had ever known. He was polite, compassionate, and courteous, and he seemed to sincerely care about her. As they ate supper, Alice and Jack spoke about their goals and ambitions for the future. Jack highlighted his enthusiasm for music, and Alice talked about her love of writing. They bonded over their common passion of art and creativity. After supper, Jack turned on some music and invited Alice to dance. They danced together in perfect accord, their bodies moving to the rhythm of the music. Alice felt a sensation of happiness flood over her as she peered into Jack's eyes. "I have to tell you something," Jack began, as they sat down on the couch. "What is it?" Alice questioned, feeling a tinge of apprehension. "I know about your previous trauma, and I want you to know that I'm here for you. I won't ever judge you or make you feel humiliated. I adore you for who you are, scars and all." Alice felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had never heard such sweet remarks before. She leaned in and kissed Jack, feeling a wave of passion and need. He kissed her back, and they collapsed into the couch, immersed in the moment. As they slept together, Alice felt a sensation of serenity and satisfaction flood over her. She realized that she had discovered something unique with Jack. He was the one who would heal her scars and teach her what genuine love and acceptance felt like. The night finished with them snuggling together on the couch, watching the stars glitter outside the window. Alice felt a feeling of hope and optimism for the future. She realized that she had a long way to go in her recovery path, but with Jack by her side, she felt like anything was possible. Over the next few weeks, Alice and Jack continued to become closer. They went on adventures together, exploring the city and doing new things. They laughed, they sobbed, and they confessed their darkest secrets and worries. Alice felt like she was finally living the life she had always dreamt of. She had a caring boyfriend who supported her and encouraged her to be the greatest version of herself. She had a feeling of purpose and a cause to wake up every morning. But as much as Alice loved Jack, she couldn't help but experience a sense of uneasiness at times. Her prior experience still tormented her, and she felt that it would always be a barrier between them. She believed that her scars would never entirely heal, and that she would never be able to totally trust another person again. One night, Alice and Jack were laying in bed together, caught up in one another's arms. Alice felt secure and protected, but she couldn't escape the sensation of worry that persisted in the back of her mind. "Jack," she whispered. "Yes, love? Do you ever fear that my prior trauma will always be a barrier between us? That I'll never completely heal?" Jack was silent for a time. Then he moved away from her slightly and looked her in the eyes. "Alice, I want you to know that I see you for who you are. Your previous tragedy doesn't define you, and it doesn't affect the way I feel about you. I adore you, scars and all. And I'll always be here to support you, no matter what." Alice felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had never encountered somebody as sweet and understanding as Jack. She leaned forward and kissed him, feeling a sense of thanks and affection. As the weeks grew into months, Alice's connection with Jack continued to deepen. They became more passionately in love with each passing day, and Alice felt that she had finally discovered her soulmate. But even as she basked in the light of their affection, Alice couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would her previous suffering always be a barrier between them? Would they be able to navigate the hurdles that life would certainly throw their way? For now, though, Alice put such thoughts aside and focused on the present situation. She was happy, she was loved, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like everything was going to be okay. Chapter 5: The Victory. Jack and Alice stood together on the rooftop of the building, the brilliant hues of the sunset decorating the sky behind them. Alice's red hair was flaming in the bright sunshine, her freckles striking out against the pale skin of her cheeks. The raised scar on her throat was scarcely visible, a monument to the mending that had taken place in the months since she had been attacked. Jack gazed at her with adoration and affection in his eyes, taking in the way she held herself with a new feeling of power and confidence. He reached out to hold her hand, and she smiled at him, the hostility in her countenance replaced by a sense of peace and acceptance. "Thank you for being here with me," Alice remarked, breaking the quiet between them. "It means a lot." Jack gripped her hand. "Always, my love. I'll be here for you, no matter what." They stayed there for a few more seconds, watching the sun fall below the horizon, until Alice turned to face Jack, a serious expression on her face. "There's something I need to tell you," she continued, her voice low. Jack gazed at her, realizing the gravity of the situation. "Anything, Alice. You may tell me anything." Alice took a deep breath, the memories of the past pouring back to her. She told Jack everything, about the attack, about the anguish and suffering that followed, about the retribution she sought and the closure she received. As she talked, Jack listened closely, his heart bleeding for the anguish that she had undergone. He held her close, his arms around her while she relived the memories. "I'm sorry, Alice," Jack remarked as she concluded. "I can't even imagine what you've been through." Alice looked up at him, a little grin on her face. "It's okay, Jack. I'm okay. And I have you now." Jack moved in to kiss her, and they stood there on the rooftop, immersed in their love for one another and the power that they had discovered together. As time passed, Alice's scars began to diminish, but the memories of the past stuck with her. She pushed herself into her profession, utilizing her experiences to inspire others who had undergone similar pain. She became a force to be reckoned with, utilizing her humor and knowledge to make a meaningful impact in the world. And with Jack at her side, she knew that anything was possible. Together, they traversed the world, discovering new cultures and meeting new people. They laughed and loved and enjoyed life to the fullest, knowing that every day was a gift. And in the end, Alice understood that she had gone full circle. From the anguish and tragedy of the past to the strength and resilience of the present, she had discovered a new sense of purpose and a new cause to live. As she stood on the rooftop once more, her red hair flaming in the warm sun, Alice smiled, knowing that she was precisely where she was supposed to be. And with Jack at her side, she knew that anything was possible. Thank you for watching Alice's inspiring story on Midnight Murmurs. We hope it touched your heart and reminded you of the power of resilience and love. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.